There's probably another two tours left in there of 2 or 3 week tours.
Okay, awesome. Good to hear, because that's where I am, and I really want to see the show.
Yeah,
Um,
I think it was really a good show this year. Everybody said it was one of their favorites because, for one thing, well, the band is rocking as usual, but I also put about a 20-minute uh, acoustic performance in the middle and question and answer bit as well. So that I think people like. It's a pretty good package.
that's awesome. I'm excited to see it. So my first question, how did you end up meeting Angelo?
Well, I met Angelo through Scroat, who is the producer
Right, that's who
for
I mean.
Celebrating David Bowie. Oh, Scroat. How
Yes,
did I? Um,
my apologies. I
I was
forgot
out in
that there are
L.A.
two Angelos.
Yeah, that's true. He is an Angelo. The first time I met Scroat, I was out in L.A. doing some stuff for the Pixar film, and he asked if we could sit down and talk for a little while. And he and my wife and I met at the hotel we were staying, and he outlined what he was planning to do, and it just went from there. So the next thing that happened, of course, is we did the first of our three tours with Celebrating David Bowie. And back then, we still had some members of the other team who left after that. But now we have a good core people who go with us from, one tour to the next. Ron, the sax player, Ron Jubila, Angelo Moore, myself, and Scroder seem to always be in all the bands. And then we add different people according to what the material is, but it's Scroat's production. So I work with him a little bit as a friend
Mhm.
on things, selecting things, and so on. But it's his show.
Okay. Yeah, I was actually at I was at the second Wiltern show that you were on for. Actually, I briefly met you after the show, and that evening was just absolutely fantastic. One of the best shows I've ever seen in my entire life.
Well, I think this one will be the same, except we may not have Sting.
Of course, right? Yeah.
One of the beauties of this is that we sometimes have an orchestra, sometimes we don't, but sometimes we go to a city and there's a good guest star waiting there for to join us. This tour we're having, I think Thomas Dolby is joining us in the East Coast part for a couple of shows.
Yeah.
And you never know who else. I've got my friend Billy Bob Thornton scheduled in for the Saban Theater in Beverly Hills. Whether or not he comes through on me for me,
Oh,
I don't know.
that
You know,
that would be very cool.
he's a busy guy too.
Of course. So going back a little bit in your career, I'm wondering, did your did your work as Bowie's guitarist and musical director for his Sound and Vision tour help you at that time with rediscovering his music? And do you think that it helped you in a way for preparing for coming out and doing the Celebrating David Bowie tours?
Well, first of all, that particular tour was it was a life changing tour for me.
Mhm.
It was, I made more money than I'd ever made. It was the most comfortable tour. We had a private jet and we traveled all over the world. We went to 27 countries. So I had a great relationship, a lot of time with David. Um, on stage, it was just he and I. So that was pretty interesting and a lot of pressure, but I really loved it.
Yeah.
But yes, you're right. It definitely reassociated me with a lot of his material, and in fact material some of which I didn't even really know that well. But
Mhm.
in being the music director, I had to arrange all of it properly for the band that we had and for David's needs. There were a couple of songs that needed to be lowered in key a little bit or something like that, and in terms of the arrangements. But David actually just stood by, um, and cheered us on. I mean, I remember we were having our first rehearsals in New York City for a couple of weeks, and there were almost no things that he wanted changed. He was very happy with everything, and that made it really great for me. Of course, we were also finishing up the song Pretty Pink Rose. And that was another unbelievable moment for me to actually get to do a duet with David.
And was your experience as his guitarist on the tour in 1978, was that similar in the sense that he was allowing you your own space to create, or was he more of giving you certain parameters and guidelines that certain songs had to adhere to?
Actually, it was completely up to me. In fact, he gave me my wings. He basically said, "Go for it and do whatever you want and take it out as far as you can go." And he, as you may see, if you see some of the old YouTube's video, he just standing on the side, sort of grinning at me like a Chelsea cat,
Yeah.
really approving of what I was doing, which always made me feel incredible. You can't believe that. So yeah, it wasn't much in the way of instruction. It was more, here, do something here. And that really opened me up from that point on in my career to be allowed to do stuff like that on so many other records, including Nine Inch Nails, and then the next band I was in, Talking Heads, and then of course King Crimson, and so on.
Yeah, I I don't know if you've heard it, but there was a live album from that 78 Bowie tour that came out a few years ago for Record Store Day called Welcome to the Blackout. And it's my absolute favorite live Bowie recording, particularly your parts, like during Station to Station. Your contributions to that, or Stay, I think that you really brought a level of almost like controlled chaos and improvisation to the band that I don't think a lot of his past musicians had.
Well, it surprised even me, because I was just suddenly blossoming, and suddenly there were things I was finding that I could do, and his music was just perfect for it. But um, what was I going to say? I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. There was something I was going to say about it, but maybe I'll think of it in a minute.
No
Um,
worries. And
yeah.
so going from that live environment in 78 into recording the Lodger album, did did his what's what I'm looking for? Did his sort of approach of standing back and allowing you to do your own thing, was that also part of the recording process of Lodger, or again was it more of, we need these songs to be a certain tightness, a certain level of, like, quote unquote togetherness, or was it more of just him letting you do your own thing?
Well, I'll tell you the story behind it so you can decide for yourself, and I guess it'll be apparent.
Okay.
Studio had a control room on the bottom floor. The recording room was above it. They had a one-way TV camera. They could look at me, I should say, in the recording room. I couldn't see them.
Mhm.
Downstairs in the studio control room would be David, Brian Eno, and Tony Visconti. And, of course, they were all working on this together. But what they said to me from the very beginning, you have to understand, this was my first studio record. The record I had done before that was with Frank Zappa. It was all live
Mhm.
takes. So it's my first time in a studio in Lake Geneva, Switzerland. Pretty big deal. And what they said to me was, we don't want you to hear the songs beforehand. We want to get your accidental responses.
Okay.
So I'm like, oh, okay. I didn't think this was how it was done. but,
Yeah.
but evidently they thought of, at that time, they were going to name the record Planned Accidents. So they
Mm.
said, no, you go up into the recording room upstairs, put your headphones on, you'll hear the drummer count off, and you just start playing. And I said, well, playing what? Can I hear the song first? No, can't hear the song. Well, can you tell me what key it's in? No. And so what they would do is they would let me kind of bungle my way through two takes, and then by the third one I might actually know where the chorus is, so they would say, no, that's it, you don't get another chance. So we
Mhm.
did that with all those songs, and then I stayed and did parts that were laid out for us. For example, Tony Visconti wrote a bunch of he wrote a score of mandolin parts for one of the songs, and I was part of that. But my all my solo guitar stuff in there is all pieced together from these accidental performances.
Interesting. That's yeah.
I know what I was going to say about stage, by the way.
Oh yeah.
First of all, I was going to ask you, I really need to hear that record right this minute. Is it just a vinyl record, though?
It's also on streaming services. Um, I
Okay,
I don't think there was a CD release, but so there was Stage, which was the original live album.
right.
But the one I'm talking about was released a few years
Yes,
ago. It's
I
called
know. Tony Visconti remixed it, and I'd been told ever since that he really improved the sound a lot and improved featured my guitar more, and I
Oh,
really want to hear that
no,
because
no,
I
no.
felt,
This is a whole different live album. This is from a different
oh,
night of the tour. This one is called Welcome to the Blackout.
okay, welcome to the blackout. All right,
Yeah,
so
so
it's not a revision of stage. All right,
no,
I see.
no.
Okay, well, I can probably tell you why they called it Welcome to the Blackout. We were playing in Oslo, Norway at one time, and which is way the heck up in the north of Europe, and we had to go way up this track, half an hour to get to the venue, and it was done outside, sort of in a kind of a building, but it was an open building,
Mhm.
and they had a generator, and we started playing the fifth song. You won't believe this, which was called Blackout, that song of David's,
Yeah.
and suddenly the power went out,
Oh my God.
and they sent us back down, all the way down to the hotel, and we thought that this was going to be a night off for us, and then 5 minutes later they said, okay, we got the power back on. We went up again. I wonder if that's the reference. I'm just wondering about it. Could be, though.
There-
I'd
y-
like to know which performance it is.
I want to say it's the last two nights of that tour.
Okay.
But yeah, it's fantastic. If you get a chance to listen to it, very highly recommend it. Um,
I definitely want to. I will today. I'm still rehearsing myself, and
mhm.
any little hints of what I did back then would be very helpful for me.
Yeah.
I'm not going to try to copy things. It would be impossible to get those sounds the same. And
Mhm.
after all, I'm a different guitarist now. I play different things I want to put in,
Mhm.
but I just like to know.
So so I'm glad that you mentioned you're rehearsing for this tour because my next question was compared to the 78 tour and the Sound and Vision tour, what songs are you most looking forward to bringing back out on this upcoming Celebrating David Bowie tour?
Well, I have my own personal favorites for different reasons.
Mhm.
Some of them are just songs that I love of David's, like "Ashes to Ashes."
Mhm.
There's really nothing going on in the guitar world for that, but I just think it's such a great song.
Yeah.
I absolutely love doing Space Oddity. I think maybe that's one of my top three favorites. And on this tour, Todd will be singing the lead, and I'll be singing harmony with him, just as I did with David in 1990. I'm looking forward to Station because I haven't played that since 1979. I don't think we played that in 1990. I'm almost certain because we were
Mhm.
playing the hits.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of it's a trial for me to see how close I can come to creating that kind of a sound again.
Mhm.
Um, I always love playing Stay, as you mentioned that one.
Yeah.
That's one where I just get to turn loose. But I think in this particular version that Scrode has in mind, everyone's going to trade off solos. So,
Oh, awesome.
he'll play one, Todd will play one, I'll play one. But it's still a song I always enjoy. Life on Mars, fantastic song. Once again, I'm mostly just singing the harmony with Todd.
Mhm.
And then it's going to be interesting. We're going to do Pretty Pink Rose with Todd singing David's part and me singing my parts.
Oh, fantastic. That's
So I'm
amazing.
really excited about that one. You
Yeah.
know, as the show goes, as I say, we pick players and people who
Mhm.
are going to be good for certain things. And I'm not good for all the things either. I don't want to be on the stage the whole time. I'm not, so I'm there, I think, about half of the time. I'm doing something, either backing someone else,
Mhm.
singing harmony, or singing the songs that I do. I think I sing maybe 6 or 7 songs. Oh, another one, Heroes. Got to have Heroes.
Oh yeah, of course.
Huge, huge song for me. I remember being 27 years old with a broken down Volkswagen, 3 months behind on my rent, driving up 21st Avenue in Nashville here, where I had a small apartment, and hearing Heroes come on the radio for the very first time I'd ever heard it, and just marveling at how great it was.
Mhm.
And 18 months later, I was playing it on stage with David.
How insane is that?
Yeah, exactly.
And kind of talking about Heroes for a second. I've always found it interesting that, on the Heroes and the Scary Monsters albums, he had Robert Fripp playing lead guitar, who you ended up being bandmates with for quite a long time. I'm wondering if that was like if the Bowie connection was something that you and Robert ever talked about.
I talked about it with Robert once or twice, and I talked about it later, many years later, with David. Once David said, "How is Robert Fripp doing?" And we talked about that then. The day I met, the evening I should say, I met Robert. I was with David Bowie, and we were at the bottom line watching a performance of Steve Reich's 18 Musicians piece,
Wow.
which sounds very much like what King Crimson sounded like, only it was on pitched percussion. You
Mhm.
know, the whole gamelan thing. Da 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 da. We were
Yeah.
doing it with guitars later, but so the lights came up and Robert was there. David pointed him out to me, and I went over. David didn't want to even go talk to him, but I went over to talk to him, and he wrote his number on my arm with a Sharpie. So after that, I said, I guess I'll go and have coffee with this guy.
Yeah. And then
And that's really what started that going. But yeah, interesting that both of us were ultimately part of David's music. And when I was recording the Lodger record, one day I came down from the recording room down to the studio, and they were laughing, the three of them. And I said, "What's so funny, guys?" And they said, "Well, we did this same technique with Robert's guitar on the previous record, where we cut it all in and edited it together in different ways. We thought it was impossible to play, but no one told you it was impossible to play. So you're so stupid. You just went ahead and figured out how to do it."
so stupid you figure out the impossible guitar part.
Yeah. I mean, they probably didn't say the word stupid, but it was,
Right.
the sentiment was how odd that was, since no one told me.
You know what? Hey, if you can do it, why not? And then
Well, it wasn't easy, I have to say,
Mhm.
but I did, whatever I could. And that was when I was one of the early proponents of where you take your finger on your right hand and you put it on a fret,
Mhm.
which is, Eddie Van Halen made that, very famous later.
Right.
But I was doing it back then, and that's kind of how I did a lot of those, because it did have these particular jumps that were impossible to do with your left hand.
Mhm.
So I figured, well, if I do it with my finger here, I can do that. It was back then, it was called right hand fretting to the few people I knew who were doing it.
Mhm.
And then eventually it's become called tapping, of course.
Right. And then another weird Bowie connection. past the Sound and Vision tour, you ended up recording guitar on a couple songs for the Downward Spiral by Nine Inch Nails, which then Nine Inch Nails famously opened for David Bowie off the back of that record.
Right. When Trent called me, actually, they called my manager. I was in Los Angeles. I had my gear. I was with me. I was doing something else, and my manager said, "I think you should consider doing this record." I said, "Well, I've never heard them. I don't know the music, but I have heard of them,
Mhm.
Nine Inch Nails." And he said, "Well, let's give it a shot." So I went to do it, and it turned out great. The recording, which we recorded in the old Mans, not Manson. Where's the
Sharon Tate.
yeah, Sharon Tate mansion, which had blacked out windows, and so we're in there all day, all night, even.
Mhm.
But at one point, we were talking, and Trent said, "I can't believe that you're here." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, we just called you on a lark because we thought you would never do this because you played with David Bowie.
Yeah.
That's why we love you. You played with Bowie. We love the stuff you did with Bowie. But we thought you would never come and play on our record." I said,
Mhm.
"Well, here I am." So yeah, there is an interesting connection there. I know that Trent asked me to play on Nine Inch Nails records because of what I did with David.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a Nine Inch Nails fan, I will admit it. But I've always very much enjoyed on the albums that he's done where you pop in, like on that instrumental Ghosts record, where you're on it for a handful of songs on that. Um, Another kind of roundabout Bowie connection, and this is more for my own personal uh, wanting to know because in I think '84 you played guitar on the album Left-Handed Dream by Ryuichi Sakamoto, the Japanese musician, and I'm
Yeah.
I'm I'm curious how that came about.
Well, it was once again just something that was offered to me through my manager, and it was curious what happened in terms of my connection to Japan. I've been there 21 times now, but the first time I went there was 1979 with David Bowie. Um, it was televised live to a quarter of the nation.
Mhm.
So one out of every four Japanese saw that and saw me
Wow.
playing Stay and all those things. The very next year, I went back with Talking Heads, who were at their prime,
Yeah.
really, and that was a big deal. And then the very next year, 1981, I went back with the first version, with the new version of King Crimson. So, if you were a Japanese person interested in that kind of music, I guess you were kind of going, "What is going on with this guy here?"
He's in everything.
Yeah. And then, so the next thing that happened the same year in 1981, we got the call from Ruichi. Now I knew a little bit about Yellow Magic Orchestra, but I just a little bit.
Mhm.
And so I was flying over to Japan, and I opened up this magazine, and there was a full-on article about Yellow Magic Orchestra and how in Japan they were like the Beatles. They couldn't even walk down the streets. They had to have bodyguards. They were so well known and popular.
Yeah.
And that was the band I was going to play with.
And so how was the experience with recording that specific album?
It was wonderful. I loved it. I mean, they just treated me, like a guitar god. Strangely, I never really got to be treated like that. The studio was at the top of a huge building in Japan, and it was one of the first digital studios in the whole world. I don't even think there was one in the United States yet. It was a Sony studio in a Sony building. And so it was really way ahead of its time. Big, huge glass windows surrounded the control room, and the control room was large, and there were lots of people there. I mean, I don't know, journalist, or I'm not sure who all these people were, but they were there, you know. Most of them didn't speak English either. And so I would go out into the room and start playing on something, and I'd finish and they'd stand up and applaud me, give me like a standing ovation, which I'd never had that happen before or since.
I wish every recording session was like this.
Yeah, no kidding. I couldn't believe it. It was just so fun. And you know, they were great. They took me you know, to some of their favorite places, real private little sushi bars and things, and
Mm.
you know, introduced me to some of the high level artists around Japan, including the photographer, Mr. Sakita, who did the Heroes cover with David.
Yeah.
And so eventually, then I was able to get Mr. Sakita to do my first record cover, which was in 1982, the following year. And that was the Lone Rhino album cover.
That's a fantastic photo.
Yeah, that's Mr. Sakita and his friend, Mr. Tanaka, who was the best nature nature photographer in all of Japan, and he brought some incredible looking pictures of rhinos that he had taken. And the one that I chose with let me see who this is. Yeah, I don't know who it is, so I'm going to avoid it. Uh, anyway, so you know, I saw the one with the bird on the back and the mountains, and you know, a little in the distance, and I said, "Oh, that is like the most perfect shot of a rhino I've ever seen."
Yeah.
So, you know, all these connections would happen from that. I mean, going to Japan with David Bowie was like going to Japan with God Himself. From that moment, everything opened, all the doors. I mean, all the manufacturers there wanted to give me things, and the
Mm.
fans would bring me gifts to my room all the time. Strange. It was
Wow.
a real a real dose of what superstardom is. Not me being a superstar, but being on stage with one.
Yeah. And only 18 months before that, in a broken down car, hearing Heroes on the radio for the first time.
Yeah, exactly. So I was really, you know, pretty green when I went out to audition for Frank Zappa. That was the first time I ever flew on a plane.
Wow.
You know, I had grown up pretty much, you know, not from a lower class, not poor family, but not a family that could afford things much.
Right.
And so being thrown into all of that was certainly a whirlwind. And fortunately, I adjusted to it pretty quickly. I got the hang of it. Thanks in large part to Frank showing me how to be a professional world class touring musician.
Yeah. And so I'm going to wrap this up, if you don't mind, with speaking of touring. After this leg coming up of the Celebrating David Bowie tour, of course, you have your Power Trio tour that you mentioned. You're doing a couple of shows with Jerry Harrison, doing Talking Heads, doing Remain in Light. Are there any other live tours or one-off engagements that you're going to be doing coming up?
No, when I finish on November 14th from doing both the Talking Heads and then the 30 shows of celebrating David Bowie, I'm done for the rest of the year. That's just about another 6 weeks of the year left. And we are currently looking at what to do and the offers for next year. But at this point, I actually don't have a single show booked for next year, which is kind of unusual. Um, I put it down to, you know, there's so many, everybody in the world is touring now because of the COVID
Yeah,
flag. So it'll happen, but so I can't really say. I don't know. I know some things I'd like to try and do, but I just, you know, I'll have to wait and see.
of course. Well, I want to thank you again for taking your time to let me hopefully pick out those last bits that were left to talk about.
That's it. I'm out of bits. There's no more picking to be
It's all
had.
done. It's all done. Well, thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to seeing the Celebrating David Bowie show in. I'll be seeing it in San Jose.
Okay, well, I'll see you there, man.
I'll see you there. Have a great rest of your day.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks.